Hello and welcome to Lost Without Excel, where it is my goal to help you complete accounting tasks in Excel. In today's video, I'm not creating a template or other kind of useful reconciliation that I've done in a lot of my other videos, because today I want to do a very short video on how to use the index and match functions, especially when kind of the data you're receiving is inconsistent in terms of kind of its format. So this is basically kind of a replacement for using a basic sum if or sum ifs formula. And I find this to be the most helpful when our source data comes from a third party. So the example I use today is source data that comes from a payroll processing company, but this could also be coming from a vendor, a customer, a business partner, just something where you don't control the exact format of this. And in this example, what I'm talking about is specifically kind of the order of each of these columns of data. So what I have here is the earnings breakout for a payroll. And there's a bunch of earnings codes up at the top. This one looks like it's regular earnings. Let's say this one's expense reimbursements. Maybe we have, that looks like it's probably a bonus. You know, some of these might be stipends, or internet reimbursements or whatever. But these may change from period to period, and they may change the order. So the end goal that I want is I have 4 departments here, and I want to summarize these 4 departments by these earning codes. Now, I could just do a pivot table, and that would work to a degree. But if we're then intending to upload this into our accounting software, even if we pivot it, we still have to then do some formulas to get it into the right format for uploading. So today I'm going to skip the pivot table and just go straight to creating that upload. So what my upload will look like is I need to have just some information off to the left here about these various payroll codes, which department I'm doing the formula for. There's going to be a general ledger account that this goes to, and then depending on which charge it is, you might have a debit or a credit. Your software might just have like an amount with positives and negatives, so you might not need both columns. Then some sort of description on our journal, and then the department again. The reason that there's 2 departments, I brought this over from a real example, and we had one department that came out of the payroll system and one department that was in the accounting system, and so I had to do a VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP. If yours are the same department in both, you really don't need both. So in this case, let's just say that I knew that this setup here, columns A through M, were never going to change. There wouldn't be as much of a need for the index match. So let's say that I want to get the regular earnings for department 100. And so I paste in the code, department 100, whichever, I don't know, 61,000, but this is kind of irrelevant for this video, but I'm assuming that if you're doing an upload, you have to tell your accounting system what general ledger account to put this to. But where I would do the sum if is I would say I want to do the sum if where the department field here is 100. When that's the case, I want to add up the earnings, and we get 20,000. So this works. You don't need the index and match if you know that your payroll data here won't change format. And then let's say I also want to get this earnings code EI. You could do the same thing and say it's still 100. I don't know, maybe this one's 62,000. But now we have to do a new sum if, where we have to say again, when the department is this one, and in this case, I want to return what looks like a bonus code. And that'll work, but the problem with that is kind of twofold. One, I don't want to be individually identifying this second column here, the sum range, because in this case, I have 10 different earnings codes, so I'd have to manually write that 10 times. And maybe it's only 10, maybe it's 30, but that seems like more work to me. And the second one is, what if when we get this data the next month, those columns are different? So for example, let's say when we receive that data the next month, the regular earnings code is now D and the EI is column J. So if I were to copy this data over the one I'm doing now when I come to my summary, I don't have regular earnings and I have a different amount for this earnings code because these formulas are linked to the columns, not the payroll codes themselves. So instead of doing it this way, what I want to do is, instead of identifying that I always want column C, I'm going to identify I always want the column that's earnings code RG. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to keep the first part of this formula. And instead of telling it which column it is, this is where we're going to add in the index and match functions. So the first thing that we need to define for the index is the sum range, which is not just the column I want. It's essentially any data that I could possibly pull here. So in this case, we're gonna skip the header row. It's gonna be everything from C, in this case, all the way to M, and then down to the bottom. And what I would recommend you do in this case is actually not just that range, because we're going to end up locking this range. What I would do is go out several more columns at the very least and go down a bunch of rows. This will protect you if in the future there's more earnings codes that kind of make this report go to the right, and if there are more employees that go beneath your current data. Then, in my example, we don't need a row number, so I'm going to put 0 because I'm not trying to specify as a row to add up. I care more about the columns that we're messing with. And in this case, I don't have a column number. I want to have the column be whichever one is that earnings code. So this is where the match comes in, where I'm going to say that I want to look up this value in the header column that we eliminated. And in this case, because I went to column Z for the data, I'm going to go to column Z for the header. And then my match type is going to be exact. And then I'm going to close up. I think, do I need another third one? Yeah, I think I need a third one. Alright, and it looks like I made a mistake in the formula, despite all of my careful preparation. So the mistake I made in here is way at the beginning, I referenced the entire columns, but then elsewhere I specified a shorter range. So all I have to do here is kind of have a consistent range, where if I'm always doing the just the, in this case it's row 2 to 500 instead of the entire column. I forgot why that is the case, but it is the case. So the benefit of doing it this way is, now that I've done this formula once, we can take all of these codes and paste them here, have our department. I'm not going to bother with changing the GL. Let's just assume that for your specific company, you know where these codes are going. And then I'm just going to drag it down. And now what we have is each of these codes and how much we need to assign to each one. Like I said, if you need a description, like regular pay, or like I said, this one is some sort of stipend, maybe this one is PTO. These are going to change for your download, so I'm not going to worry about that. And maybe for me, the department is admin or something like that if we did a lookup. But the other reason that I like the index match is, let's say that here is the next month, and some of these key columns, like this here, this EI code, which is in H, the next month it's coming through in J, and that doesn't matter. So I'm going to paste over the entire data, and this all stayed the same. Now, one of the things that you will have to watch out for is to always be checking your totals here, because in this case, I had 2 new codes that came through, not for Department 100. I'll just change that to 100 for the sake of the video here. But so let's say that the next month you have an overtime code and whatever E6 is came through. That wasn't on the previous payroll report, because sometimes if no one had that code for that payroll, you may not get that in your download. So the benefit of using the index and match is, one, it is completely irrelevant that the order of these columns changed, because we're not dictating a specific column, we're telling it to go and find that specific name. So in this case, I think I'm going to do this one by one. Let's say that we had 2 new earnings codes. And all we have to do is, we do have to manually put in the department and the GL, but in terms of going and finding it, we've only had to do this formula once. Now, there are some cases where some of these might be negative codes, so you might need to change the direction. But the other nice thing about doing it this way is, let's say that for Department 100, we set up all of the codes and all of these GLs are the same, and we have all 12 or however many codes set up here for descriptions. So to do this for the next department, you can copy the same formulas and overwrite this, and now we have the summary for the next department. And I could repeat it for department 300 and 400, but it's basically the same. Now, there is a little bit of maintenance to this if you are going to use this for your payroll upload, because when there are new earnings codes, you have to add them for each department. The way that I usually solve this is, when I set up my template, I grab several months worth of these payroll reports and get kind of a comprehensive list of this. So even though in this case there's only 12, throughout the year you might have 20 or 30 codes. I would just set them up, even though some of them, like here, are going to come through as zeros most of the time. It's easy when you're doing your upload just to filter out the zeros, and you're only going to upload what's actually coming through. The last thing, if this formula didn't look scary enough, the last thing that I would mention, just kind of if you want to prevent yourself from getting an error if a code disappears. So like, let's just say this earnings code 5 disappeared. You're going to get an NA error because this will happen if I use that example where, let's say that throughout the year we have 25 or 30 codes that might come through, but on this particular payroll we didn't have this E5 code. You don't want to, having this NA error is going to mess up some formulas that you have, especially if you have something where you're offsetting all of these debits against like a payroll clearing account. This is going to mess you up. So the way that I fix that is I use an if is in a combination. So what that's going to look like is what we have today is we basically have our, our formula, function, whatever we have, right? So in this case, what we have is this complicated thing here. To avoid these NA errors, I'm going to replace that with an if and an is in a formula. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to say if our formula is returning a non-applicable or NA error, then don't give me that error, just put a 0. But if there isn't a NA error, then I still want the formula. So the way I'm going to do this is and this is easier to do at the end as opposed to kind of as you're creating it. So I like to get the formula set first, and then I'm going to cut that, and I'm basically just going to say if the result of what we created is NA, then give me a 0, but if not, give me the formula. And it looks really long and complicated up there, but in reality, it's just a replacement. It looks complicated because our formula is quite long. But when you do it that way and copy it down, in these examples where that code disappeared, now it's just going to give us a 0, and we don't have to kind of problem solve each one of those, or we don't have to change these codes on a regular basis. So that's all I have for you today. I said I find this method to be most helpful when what you're getting, whether it's from a payroll company or from any other third-party source, is most helpful to me when these earnings the columns have consistent titles but an inconsistent order. And even if they're in a consistent order, I find it saves time just so I don't have to constantly be, for all 12 of these, I don't have to write it 12 times to constantly move the sum column. So I hope this is helpful, and I appreciate you checking out my video, and good luck with your accounting.